Welcome back. Well, keeping tabs on all of these comments about true federalism, restructuring, what should we be doing next? Well, now we've got Onueze Okocha, MFR, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, former President of the NBA, the former Attorney General and Commissioner for Justice in Rivers State, who joins us this morning. Good morning, sir. Thank you for joining us today on the program. Now, several rhetorics making the rounds about what kind of steps the country should be taking in the name of true federalism, restructuring, and even up till this morning, and who knows, for some time to come, it still will be there. You may have heard some of them. So give us your impression as to what is the best way that these kind of rhetoric should be done, or the kind of steps we should be taking, perhaps legally or from the National Assembly, to be seen to be doing much more than just talk.
Hello, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, sir.
Can you see me?
We can hear you.
Can you see me?
Okay, we can see you, and I'm told we can.
I'm not seeing you. That's why I'm asking that.
We can hear you, sir. We can see you now.
I can't see myself. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Just go ahead.
Well, let me say thank you for inviting me to this program, and also greet your listeners and our viewers if there are any links by television. I say basically that the problem with Nigeria can only be effectively resolved by a true and properly convened national conference. We are presently facing difficulties because of the inconsistencies and incongruities in our constitution. The 1999 constitution that was bequeathed to us by the departing military administration headed by General Abdul Salam Abubakar. Since then, we as Nigerians have been tinkering with it. It hasn't served us well, and every once in a while, you hear the National Assembly, that group that says they are the elected representatives of the peoples of Nigeria, doing what they say, amendment, modification, and so on and so forth. That is not going to work. Why? Because the National Assembly itself is lopsided, constituted in such a way that the interests of certain portions and parts of this country are not adequately represented. So we have to put our heads together, put on our thinking caps, and find a way to convoke a proper national conference so that these issues can be trashed out. I'm aware, under Obasanjo, there was a national conference. The report is there. It's still gathering dust. Under President Jonathan, there was a national conference. The report is there, and this one under Jonathan. Now here, many of the people who were at that conference basically agreed on most of the topics that were raised. But we know that, again, we're expecting the National Assembly to articulate those points. But they cannot, because, as I say, they are lopsided. They don't represent us. Some of them are, representing a weighted majority. Because, you see, everybody knows that the way you get to the National Assembly is on the basis of constituencies, senatorial zones, federal constituencies. So these things are lopsided, and I hope that Nigerians can agree that for the love of our country, let us all agree to meet together on a basis that will show that every ethnic nationality, every interest group is duly represented at that conference.
Say we need to convoke a proper national conference, and then you reference the ones we've had before. What was improper about those ones we had before?
Again, because the way they selected the members there was not too nationalistic. It was articulated by the head of state at the time, the president at the time. And some people continued to complain that they were not being represented by those who were at that conference. But even at that, we feel that the one under Jonathan, where some measure of consensus was arrived at on several of the topical issues, is a good starting point. Now, convoke a proper national conference. Ensure that everybody is represented. Bring that Jonathan's constitutional conference report and put there so that they can now look at it on the basis of, look, is everybody's interest covered? Or if not, the majority interests, are they covered? So this is my own position on that matter.
The challenge, you may agree, over time has been the process. I mean, we have, just as you have highlighted, we have had a few constitutional conferences. The challenge a number of people have pointed to concerning convoking a proper national conference, as you said, is the process. How? Now, if the federal government does not take the lead, and the National Assembly, as you say, is incapable of doing justice, how will it then happen?
The National Assembly, based on altruistic and, nationalistic interest of all of us, should pass a law to convoke that conference. And that law will be the basis upon which the conference will proceed. When they pass that law will indicate who will be the members, how they will represent, who they will represent, how the document they produce will be, translated into a constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, properly so called. So that is my own way of articulating that point, that let the National Assembly pass a law that will convoke that conference. And then that law should state all the modalities that we are talking about. And then at the end of the day, a referendum, of course, will be proper to bring that constitution into force. All those should be contained in the law to be passed by the National Assembly.
Well, if you say you weren't completely confident that the National Assembly was capable of convoking a National Assembly, a national conference, how confident are you that that law that you expect the National Assembly to promulgate or to make for a national conference to be convoked would be satisfactory?
Well, we hope. Everybody, as I say, needs to embrace the fact that we want to be nationalists at this time. Let us not play partisan politics. Let us not play ethnic politics or tribal politics. Let us not be nepotistic. Nepotism has always been one of our issues in this country. So let the National Assembly, even as they are awkwardly constituted now, the members there are still Nigerians. And let them agree that, listen, let us do this for the sake of our country, because the country is falling to pieces, as we can see, and they too are involved. If Nigeria survives, all of us will survive. But if Nigeria fails, you and I can only guess what will become the fate of all of us.
Well, what are some of those things that you would expect, to be addressed in this national conference? Of course, there have been a lot of interests talking about state police, resource control, and the rest of them. What are some of those things you would want addressed at that national conference that may or may not have been addressed before?
Well, first, the structure of governance. We already know that we have three arms of government. We also know that we have a local government system. And this is replicated in the states. You have the executive, the judiciary, and the legislatures of the states, just as you have them at the federal level. Then the local governments, their functions are clearly stipulated in the Constitution. We have to look at the things that are, one, on the legislative list, because legislative power is where most of the power that I'm talking about needs to be, properly streamlined, is key. I, for one, feel that there are too many subjects, too many items put on the exclusive legislative list. As the exclusive legislative list is presently, the National Assembly can legislate on anything, because you have both the exclusive list and the concurrent list. Now, if you reduce the items on the exclusive list, that is items the federal legislature can make laws on, you have, to a great extent, given power, more power to the states that they currently have. And when we relate back to the 1963 Constitution, which was our last, undisputed, shall I say, Constitution, we see there that many of the items that were on the legislative list there are no longer the same now, because you have much, much more than you have in the current Constitution. So when you reduce the powers of the federal legislature, you have, by so doing, given the states certain powers. This thing we talk about devolution of powers, so that the states can have some measure of control over what is happening within their territories, and particularly the resources which are in their territories. Next, we have to talk about revenue allocation formula. Revenue allocation has been at the root of this thing that we say resource control. The minorities have felt that since the Willings Commission report, which was even articulated before independence in 1960, a lot of their fundamental rights, a lot of their interests have been taken away from them. So once you do that and ensure that the states have a greater measure of autonomy, then the states will return to their various legislatures and expect that they will make those laws to suit the minorities in their states, and also the people's and other interests in their states.
Okay, but speaking about the states, sorry to jump in, just give us 3 minutes. We'll be back and continue from that perspective, the role of the states. That's in a moment. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're still talking about what steps, what kind of measures should the country be taking to solve the challenges, the security challenges that confront us. We've got OCG Okocha, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, former President of the NBA, still with us. Well, you were making reference to the states, but with respect to convening this conference or the laws that will bring about the conference, is it just the National Assembly that's got that role? Don't the states have any responsibility whatsoever to ensure that this conference happens? And what is it if they do?
Well, I think that this law, since it will be all-embracing and all-encompassing and relates to constitutional issues, should be made by the National Assembly. In that same law, the responsibilities of the states can be stated. You follow? Because the states also have to go back to their own assemblies and make a law that may assist in, one, how to select the representatives of the states. You know, most of our states are not as homogeneous as some. A few states are homogeneous. The people from the southwest states are mostly Yorubas. Most of the states, like Rivers, have minority groups, many ethnic groups. Perhaps in the South, the only nearly homogeneous state is Bayelsa. All of them there are Ijaws. But in our old state, I'm from Rivers State, we have many ethnic nationalities. I'm Ikwere, we have the Calabaris, we have the Ijaws, just like, Calabaris and Okrika and a few of the ethnic groups in Rivers are also Ijaws. We have the Ogonis, we have the Ibanese, Boni, Opobo. We also have the Epeyes. We have many ethnic groups in Rivers State, the Ndokis and so on and so forth. So we need to also know that the states have a responsibility, and principally their own responsibility would be to know how to select their representatives in the national conference to ensure that all ethnic groups in the states, all political and social interests are also looked after. And you know, when I talk about social and political interests, I'm not talking of partisan politics. I'm talking about those who represent organizations, associations like the Nigerian Bar Association, the Nigerian Union of Journalists, teachers, and so on and so forth. So these are the things that may be included in that federal law that, you know, can be domesticated in the states so that things can flow without too many legal obstacles.
The selection process is going to be quite a chore because we've seen, or we saw even during the 2014 conference, how controversial the method for picking people was. Even the associations that were represented there, you know, had a lot of talk about, you know, why associations was the basis rather than ethnic groups. And we saw how they tried to get around that problem because they said that, you know, after all, the people in those associations represented Nigeria. Nonetheless, asking what you think of the fact that right now, this constitution as it stands, there are those who maintain that it hasn't even been put into operation. If you look into what is going on between the judiciary now and the executive, asking for independence, which they say is enshrined in the Constitution. How are you sure that if we have a new document, what is currently happening to this Constitution will not befall the new Constitution that will come out?
Well, you can never be sure of the future. You know, every constitution can always have loopholes because we're human beings. We are not perfect. Nobody has made a perfect document. Even the American Constitution, you see, has undergone so many amendments that even till today, anybody can rise up and say this is in need of amendment, and they will go ahead and examine it on its merits. But you see, when there is a proper national conference, most of the issues that are at stake will be hopefully attended to, so that you'll have the minimum of difficulties with the new document that will be produced as our constitution. So, to answer your question, quite honestly, nobody can be sure. But let us make sure that the new document reduces to a large extent those current inconsistencies and incongruities in the current constitution, the 1999 constitution.
What do you make of those who say, I mean, looking at some of the difficulties that we have faced as a people and those that we're currently facing, especially with regards to security challenges in the state, what do you make of those who say that the state governors haven't fully exercised the powers that they have, and their fears that if they have even more, the chances are high that it will only be exercised at the whims and caprices of the governors?
Well, let me say this. Everything depends on the institutions that you establish under any constitution. If the institutions are strong, regardless of who is governor, regardless of who is president, the country, the states will continue to work. Look at America, for instance. I'm not saying it's a perfect democracy, but look at the difficulties they went through when President Donald Trump was in office. Yet the institutions were working. Trump may be saying one thing, the Congress may be saying another thing, the Democratic Party may be saying one thing, and the Republican Party, the two dominant parties in America, may be saying another thing. But the institutions were working. Law and order was properly articulated. The sheriffs, the mayors, and all those who were running government, regardless of political differences. So, no single governor under a situation where you have proper checks and balances can hijack the law enforcement arm of government.
frozen at the moment, but well, I'm sure that there will be some other perspectives to that, because, I mean, there's this matter out there where some asking, look, is it going to be top-bottom approach to this or bottom-up approach? I mean, the perspectives that Mark is trying to seek is, I mean, you have heard people say, look, we need to ensure that we don't replicate the kind of challenges that the country is complaining of for the federal at the states. Because if the governors have a lot more powers devolved to them, how do you then ensure that the people don't get the short end of the stick? Well, he's talking about putting those institutions in place. But the state assemblies are properly constituted as it is today. But have we seen any of those state assemblies? Perhaps we should put it back to, I think we'll have them back now. Well, if I could just follow up on some of the questions, the response you were given about putting in place proper institutions. Take, for instance, in the states houses of assemblies are properly constituted, but we rarely see them stand up to the executive on behalf of the people. So what do you think is missing in that part, such that if more powers are devolved to the states, things will flow normally?
Let me say this. It's a moot point whether or not the state houses of assembly are properly constituted. The first thing is basically how were they elected into positions as representatives of particular constituencies in the states. You follow? And you know it. All through the Federation, the governors are controlling the House of Assembly. And any speaker or any house that tries to assert independence, the next thing you hear is that they have impeached that speaker and another speaker is put in place. So really, it is the same thing I'm talking about, building institutions. Let us have a proper electoral system. Let us have a way where the true representatives of the people will be those sitting in that assembly. And then, you know, an assembly should have its own independence. Just as we are clamoring for independence of the judiciary, the executive should also have its own independence, so that, except for those matters where there are concentric circles, no particular arm of government should control the other. Each one should be allowed to perform its functions and its roles as stipulated in the Constitution and under the law.
You know, one of the challenges that, you know, one can deduce from some of the things that have happened is that it's not a failure of the law or paucity of laws. It is that of execution. The question Chamberlain asked, for instance, the provisions of the Constitution and the laws are very clear on the functions of the houses of assembly. The National Assembly has its duty of oversighting the executive. We don't see much of that at the state level. So the question then is, what kinds of checks and balances should be there that would compel the National Assembly, the state houses of assembly, to do their jobs as expected by the law to the advantage and the benefit of the people?
First, financial autonomy. That is the subject matter of the current strike by judiciary workers and then legislative workers. Financial autonomy. If you take away from the executive the power to control how funds flow to the assemblies, then suddenly you will know that the governor cannot control what is happening in the state assembly. Just like if you take away what the power of release of funds is at the national level, the president cannot really control what is happening in the National Assembly. You understand? These are arms of government that are supposed to be independent, and their independence can only be secured when they are financially autonomous. So this is the main problem that we have.
But as things stand today, I mean, there are many say they haven't seen sufficient steps, perhaps some say body language of the relevant authorities to ensure, maybe the National Assembly now, to ensure that this process or this law, which you spoke about, to bring about this conference is going to happen. So if they don't go ahead and do that, what choice do you think the country has?
Sorry about that. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Did you get the question?
Yes. You asked, how do we ensure that this law is properly, articulated, right?
Yes, please.
Yes. I said Nigerians have to rise above personal interests, sectional interests, political interests. That is the key. Let us first accept that we are Nigerians. And we have a responsibility towards our country, towards the rest of our people. Once we have that nationalistic spirit, and very few can boast of having a nationalistic spirit. Everybody thinks about his family, his tribe, and so on and so forth. But once we can have members elected to those houses, those legislative houses, that have the nationalistic bent of mind, we can, to a reasonable extent, guarantee that they will do things for the interests of the country. Right now, they are doing things for their own personal interests. How many laws have they passed in the National Assembly since inception in 1999 that had to do with matters that impacted on national life? They are more interested in their personal allowances, their housing, their vehicles, and so on and so forth. And every day you hear one story of the other about a lobby going on. Somebody wants something, he has to lobby. Was there not a minister who was sacked before because he was trying to get National Assembly to do certain things? You follow? So we have to have people who are nationalists to be our representatives so that when they get to either the National Assembly or the state assemblies, they would know that they are representing the country. Yes, everybody has a political interest, but look at it. Our political parties don't even have ideologies. So really, we are all in the same boat. Today, one decomes from the other, and tomorrow another decomes from that to another. So this is the regrettable thing about Nigerian politics at this stage.
Indeed, you've touched again on having credible people with nationalistic views in the National Assembly. Because I was just about to draw to your attention that if you put it out there as to whether or not the financial autonomy of the National Assembly has ensured its independence, some people, there will definitely be divided opinion as to how independent the current National Assembly is, despite its financial autonomy. But then again, you brought it down to having people with a certain mindset, especially that nationalistic mindset. Nonetheless, how do you think that, because looking at the entire electoral process, how do you think that power can return back to them, the true power of selection? Because we know that oftentimes the people go with the choices presented to them by the political parties, and oftentimes the choices are not very, very, let's say, pleasant. Sometimes the choices are like between the devil and the deep blue sea. How do you think that true power can return to the people in such a way that the options that are thrown up for elective offices are such that they're credible and people that they know will truly represent their interests?
It's not going to be easy, quite frankly, but let me say this. The credibility of the electoral umpire is paramount here. We must have a truly independent National Electoral Commission. Again, if somebody has the power to appoint the INEC chairman, who will be declared by a National Assembly which he controls or his party controls, you have difficulties. That's why I say it's not going to be easy. But we must have a credible electoral system in this country, because it's only by that credible election that we can be sure that those who are representing the people are those who are selected. And there's a limit to what political parties can do, because there should be a provision for independent candidates. And once you have a provision for independent candidates, then the people and the Electoral Commission will decide, will determine who gets there. I remember a situation where in my own ethnic group here in the First Republic, they selected somebody from another ethnic group to represent an area that was largely populated by my people and Ahuda people, the Kwere people and the Beye people. And they select a party which was in control here, the NCNC, selected a candidate who was not even from any of our ethnic groups. Our own candidate now ran as an independent candidate, and he won the election in 1963. You follow? So this is the point, that if you have a credible electoral system and you have provisions that allow those who want to run, if they cannot get into contesting for elections through a political party, because the political party is too partisan and they have their own difficulties, you'll be surprised that, yes, nationalistic people, those who represent the people, will emerge as candidates in both the National Assembly and the state assemblies.
I don't know if you've had time to think about it, because INEC, every time we pose that question to INEC, they think that the logistics to have independent candidacy will be a nightmare. I don't know if you've had time to think about how it will be possible for us to incorporate that into our laws in such a way that we do not make a mess of the entire process.
What is the difficulty they have? Because you see, anybody who wants to contest election has to start by contesting at a certain level, which is invariably his ward level. He emerges from there to the local government level, from there to the state level. What is our next difficulty? Let the parties and the independent candidates decide. I'm running for election. I don't have to have a political office to run for election because I'm an independent candidate. I don't have to have party office nationwide before you register me as a political party. Those are difficulties that they are putting in front of those who really want to help this country and represent their people at these assemblies and in elective positions. So I don't see the difficulty that INEC can have. By the time it gets to state election, the number would have been reduced. And if you have 1,000 people running for office, INEC should be in a position to manage the logistics of how 1,000 people can contest for election. We have had zero-party elections in this country, and people were elected. So I don't see the difficulty that INEC has. Things can be properly structured so that those who represent the people can actually emerge.
All right. Just one more thing before we go. When you spoke about financial autonomy, can financial autonomy be a standalone, or what happens to the way judges are appointed? Isn't it of equal importance?
Yes, so we have currently a situation where we have this behemoth. I served on it at some point. In fact, I did 2 terms on the National Judicial Council. The National Judicial Council is inappropriate for a federation. Let me say so without mincing words. You cannot sit in Abuja and you are dictating to me how many courts I will have, how many judges I will have in River State. It does not go well. And you limit these things in such a way that those who really have litigation issues are not having enough courts and enough judges. Yet those who don't have regular, we have a different system of jurisdiction or jurisprudence in certain other areas. We have customary courts, we have Sharia courts. Let each state decide what courts it wants to have. And let each state decide who should be in those courts. You follow? And when you get to federal courts, then the National Judicial Council, which should be a supervisor, can look into what is happening at the Federal Judicial Service Commission that determines who gets to federal courts. In a federation, each state should be allowed some measure of autonomy, including the issue of appointing its own judges.
All right.
Determining how many courts it requires. In the old regions we had in those days, in the First Republic, each state could establish its own court of appeal. We don't need a court of appeal that is a federal court of appeal. We can have a federal court of appeal dealing with federal matters. But for state matters like land, like chieftaincy. What does the federation have to do with land and chieftaincy, for instance? Let the states appoint their own courts of appeal. And then constitutional issues are the only issues that will go to the Supreme Court. Right now, many will tell you that the Supreme Court is overworked. And there's a huge backlog of cases. And you know they will add the adage, justice denied, justice delayed is justice denied. So we need to restructure this country and give the states more powers than they currently have. That way we may be able to solve some of our lingering difficulties.
All right, well, good place to anchor. Mr. Onoeze Okocha, MFR, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, former President of the NBA, former Attorney General and Commissioner for Justice for Rivers State, and as you just heard, he served twice on the NJC. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you very much.